So Iran and China have gone and done something pretty cool. Shall we take a look? This article over here, this one is from the Times of Israel. And let me read you the headline. It says, Iran, China signed a huge 25-year strategic deal, which could reduce U.S. regional influence. Oh, no. Oh, no. So Beijing, so this took place, just a few hours ago, right? And I can show you the tweet from Iran's foreign minister, Javad Zarif, who's really, he's cool. He's a really good diplomat. And he says, pleased to welcome my Chinese friend and counterpart, Foreign Minister Wang Yi, to Tehran. Excellent exchange on expansion of global, regional, and bilateral cooperation in the context of our comprehensive strategic partnership, culminated in the signing of a historic 25-year strategic roadmap. So, as you can imagine, people in Foggy Bottom are shitting their pants now, right? So let's look at what this deal says, okay? Now, the title of it is the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership, okay? And it covers a variety of economic activity from oil and mining to promoting industrial activity in Iran, as well as transportation and agricultural collaborations. And so the details of this, they come from an article in the New York Times and a draft that they got their hands on, I think, last year. And so, again, look at the title of this article from the New York Times. It says, China with $400 billion deal, with $400 billion Iran deal could deepen influence in the Middle East. So you can see already from the titles of the articles, they're trying to fearmonger, look, this is going to weaken U.S. influence in the Middle East. Oh no, because as you all know, U.S. influence in the Middle East is a driving force for peace, right? Just stability, prosperity. Everyone is doing so well because of U.S. influence. And then here they're saying, look, Chinese influence could increase. Oh no. So, it's like this drip conditioning that they do in the mainstream media. I mean, sometimes it's very overt and brazen. And then in, other times they'll just slip it in. It's there, right? And they condition you this way. And I mean, that's the whole point of language, right? So they know what they're doing. It's not accidental. And they say here that, again, this is a sweeping economic and security agreement. Okay, and they say, look, the deal could deepen China's influence in the Middle East and undercut American efforts to keep Iran isolated. Good. That's great. And I love how in the next, immediately over here, they start talking about the Iran nuclear deal as if Iran is the one that does not want to go back into it. So they're saying President Biden has offered to resume negotiations with Iran over the 2015 nuclear accord that his predecessor, Donald Trump, abrogated 3 years after it was signed. American officials say both countries can take synchronized steps to bring Iran into compliance with the terms of the agreement while the U.S. gradually lifts sanctions. Iran has refused to do so, and China has backed it up, demanding that the United States act first to revive the deal it broke by lifting unilateral sanctions that have suffocated the Iranian economy. Okay, so let me translate this bullshit paragraph for you, because it's once again framing the entire nuclear issue in a very particular manner. So they say, pay attention to the language. They're saying Iran has refused, right? They don't say the United States has refused to lift sanctions and stop, starving Iranians and, preventing them from importing medical equipment and medical supplies, including during COVID, right? No, they don't say that. They say, oh, look, Iran, they're so stubborn. They just won't get back in the deal, right? They just can't see a reason. No, that's not what happened. And, I did an episode last week about the nuclear deal, and I had Scott Ritter on to talk about it. And so, the thing is that Biden, when he offers Iran to sit down and talk, he knows they're going to say no. He knows they're going to refuse, because Iran has been extremely clear since the beginning. They want sanctions lifted, right? They want the United States to get back in the deal. There's nothing to sit down and talk about. This is ridiculous. They already did that in 2015. And Biden and his administration know this better than anyone, because they were the people who sat down and negotiated the goddamn deal. So they're not stupid. If I know this and you know this, they also know this. It's just PR, right? Oh, look, we offered them a chance and they just won't sit down. No, you know goddamn well they're not going to sit down, because there's nothing to discuss. And this idea that they offered a step, it was like a synchronized step plan, right? Iran, for example, reduces number of centrifuges, And then the U.S. lifts maybe sanctions on its banking sector, and then, et cetera. So tit for tat, like we'll go step by step and then ease back into the agreement. And they're saying Iran refused that because what they're not telling you is that it turns out the United States, they wanted to have a closed door meeting, or, maybe one in public. But the point is that they wanted to have a meeting and use it as some kind of success. Like, they weren't going to accept having this step-for-step plan, this synchronized plan, without meeting as well. Because what they wanted to do is like, oh, look, we went and we sat down and, we this is a huge diplomatic victory. And because we are so gentle and we are so, we are so benevolent, we are going to ease sanctions on Iran as a result of our extraordinary diplomatic endeavors. So Iran was like, no, look, you lift the fucking sanctions, which are a violation of the deal, and you get back into the deal, or there's nothing to discuss, right? That's it. So again, this is a small parenthesis, but it's important to point that out because they keep putting the shit in there. And how does this relate to the strategic agreement that they just signed? Well, here you go, because the sanctions, they've crippled Iran's economy, right? So look at the oil output, for example. This is from OPEC, okay? And you can see here that when the JCPOA was signed, you guys saw that video the other day where I said 2015? Yeah, when it was signed in 2015, okay, so soon thereafter, you can see how the oil output went up, right? So it's gone over here from, what is that, roughly 2.8 million barrels per day, and it's shot up as soon as we got into 2016. So actually, if you look from March to March, so March 2015, we're looking at 2.7, 2.8 million barrels per day. And then you look at March 2016, it's already shot up to 3.2. And then you look at March 2017, it's shot up to 3.8. So, I mean, there's a clear effect. It's not an accident. We know for a fact, you can go and read it. Donald Trump specifically targeted Iran's oil sector and energy sector. He specifically targeted their banking sector as well. So it's like, we're not just going to screw over your the main backbone of your economy, which is oil. We're also going to make sure you can't engage in finance and trade. We're going to cut you off from the international market. So, it's all planned out, right? And I think Iran has like 1,500 sanctions on it from the U.S., something absurd. It has more sanctions than all other countries combined. I mean, you want to come here and tell me that this is not, siege warfare? I'm sorry, but you're mistaken. And so, Iran is looking for other ways to circumvent that. One of those ways was nuclear energy, right? Because Iran knows that they're an oil-based economy, just like Venezuela, right? Even Syria, 25% of your economy comes from oil. That's a significant chunk. And the U.S. knows this, and it goes and it tries to screw over these countries by cutting off their oil or literally just stealing it, like in the case of Syria. And actually, even in the case of Iran and Venezuela, they claim at least that they pirated. I love how they just openly admit pirating ships, like as if this is the 16th century or some shit. They confiscated 4 tankers that were being sent from Iran to Venezuela because Venezuela has the largest oil reserves in the world, but they can't do anything with them. They can't refine them into fuel because of, infrastructure's collapsed because of sanctions. And so Iran sent them some fuel, right? And then these were actually on private ships. So the U.S. basically pirated private ships, and this oil was bought from Iran by private persons and was sent to Venezuela, and they pirated them and sold it off, right? So the U.S. is not just stealing oil in Syria for Delta Crescent Energy. They're also selling Iranian oil, and they've done this twice already. So literal pirates. And so the point is, Iran realized a long time ago that they have to kind of wean off of their oil-based economy. And one way to do that, to secure your energy demands, is with nuclear energy, right? So there's no nuclear weapons program in Iran. There's a nuclear program, period, like a civilian nuclear program for nuclear reactors to produce, to meet your energy demands or for research purposes. There's not a weapons program. You need one for the other, yes, but if Iran really had a nuclear weapons program, we would know. They don't have one. They just don't. And they're just fear-mongering about it, right? And they want to make sure that Iran can't have a civilian nuclear program so that they're forced to rely on oil so much, and that way they can fuck with their economy even more. And so China and Iran signing this agreement now, this is great because, once again, United States, they want to come around and bully countries in the Middle East and force them into regime change and force their own foreign policy agenda onto them. No, that's not going to work anymore. That's not going to work. And this is very significant because it's a 25-year deal, right? That we're talking about a quarter century here. And of course, you already had cooperation between China and Iran, China and Syria. This is not something new, but the fact that they've come and inked this deal and you have over $400 billion being invested. I mean, this is really significant. And it's also a partnership that's not just based off of, economic growth, but also they're going to have sharing of intelligence. They're going to have military cooperation together. So you can be sure that people in Whitehall and people in DC, they're shitting their pants at this. I mean, I'm sure they saw this coming at one point, but, they must be really pissed because this definitely, as they say, it undercuts U.S. influence. Good. What is U.S. influence except destruction anyway? So, I want to show you. This was a tweet from Ben Norton, right? He said the massive 25-year China-Iran agreement is an absolute game changer for West Asia. Iranian President Hassan Rouhani thanked China for standing up to American unilateralism. And as Iran's supreme leader, Khamenei put it in February, the post-U.S. era has ended. The post-U.S. era has started, meaning the era of unilateralism, post-Cold War after 91, with the U.S. as the world's foremost hyperpower. That has ended. So, it's definitely starting, man. We talk about an empire crumbling. You can see that domestically, but it's also happening on the international stage. There's, every empire, man, they can only go so far bullying and stealing. And then there comes a point where, people are going to find a way around that. And that's good. That's good because I don't think people in Washington, D.C. should be telling people in Iran what to do. So never mind killing them with sanctions. And this, of course, is it's going to send them raging, right? If you look over here also, and let me remind you of the Belt and Road Initiative. So, I've talked to you about Palmyra before in Syria. Palmyra, this ancient city, thousands of years old. At one point, what's interesting about Palmyra is that it was on the Silk Road. When we talk about the Silk Road, how they used to trade in ancient times. Yeah, Palmyra was a very important point on the Silk Road. So you'd have people coming all the way from China to trade there and vice versa. And so, China, they've been trying to revive or adapt that in a modern way. And they've been looking at doing this Belt and Road Initiative. And this is also something that the U.S. absolutely hates because they're seeing a lot of competition and circumvention of their hegemony. They don't want U.S. hegemony being diminished in any way. This scares them. They don't like that. That's why, Donald Trump does stupid shit like saying he's going to ban TikTok. It's not because TikTok is, he has a personal beef with it. It's because TikTok is, a number one app on the App Store and everyone's using it. And it's bad for them to have a non-U.S. company with so much influence in, and market share. They can't have that. It has to be Facebook. It has to be Silicon Valley. And he was literally threatening them. You either sell TikTok to Microsoft or we're fucking banning you. I mean, this is so interesting how the U.S. talks about mutual cooperation and respect and trade and free market. That is a monopoly. That is a mafia. They're telling you give us a cut or flat out just you hand over your shit or we are going to kick you out. That is a mafia. And you're not just seeing that with TikTok, with an app. I mean, you're seeing that with Huawei as well, right? The manufacturer of phones. So they come up with this bullshit about spyware and stuff. And I mean, look, if we're going to be fair, wouldn't surprise me if it were true. But it's really ironic for the United States and it's really hypocritical for the U.S. to talk about spyware when, they're spying on literally the entire planet. I mean, come on. With your logic, you should ban Google then and Apple and virtually every tech company in Silicon Valley if you really cared about that. But they're not going to do that. They don't mind spying on the planet. They just want U.S. companies to spy on the planet. So that's what it's about. And then, of course, you see this with resources, right? So just like with Venezuela, with Syria, with Iran, it's like you either give us your fucking oil or we will coup you like the British and the Americans did in 1953 in Iran, right? You either give us a cut or we're going to come and put a regime in place like Juan Guaido in Venezuela who will give us a cut, right? You either give us your lithium in Bolivia or we're going to put in someone like Jeanine Áñez who's going to give us fucking lithium. It's like a mafia. This is the entire foreign policy. It's a fucking mob. It's all based on, this organized crime. That's what it is, right? And so this sends them fuming that people are finding a way around this. It sends them fuming because this part of this deal that Iran and China are signing now is going to help Iran export a lot of its oil because, as I mentioned, Donald Trump, he put sanctions on Iran's oil sector, right? On the entire oil sector. That means you can't deal with their oil companies. You can't buy any of their oil. You can't import or export any of their oil, or you will be punished or jailed or fined. And so, Iran, and by the way, at one point, which is really interesting, I'll get to that in a second because it's with a nuclear deal. But the point is here that Iran is going to be able to sell off some of its oil to China now, right? So it's an exchange. They're trading goods now, and one of those commodities is oil. And because Iran has been deprived of actually being able to sell that on the international market, you remember Iran has Iran's one of the largest oil producers in the world. This is good now because now they have a place to sell it. They can actually use it to get something in exchange, right? Whereas they couldn't because of these U.S. sanctions, and not just U.S. sanctions, EU sanctions as well. So this is a great way for them to circumvent being isolated from the international market. And again, this is not a question of just like, oh, great, they can make some money. No, this you're not understanding. The reason this is so important is because public infrastructure depends on this shit. Okay, when you cut off a country's, if it's an oil-based economy and you prevent that country from selling its oil, it can't fund social programs. It can't fund roads. It can't build shit. It can't take care of its people. Do you understand? So, I mean, that's not an exaggeration. It goes way further than that. People literally die because of this, right? And of course, Iran, they've been quite ingenious. They found ways to build their own missiles. They've ramped up their defense industry, which is why Israel's so scared of their ballistic missiles. And that, it's not about nukes because they don't have any. And then Iran, for example, they've been doing their own COVID vaccines, right? I also covered that on my television program about how they've been developing their own COVID vaccine because they've been cut off, from the rest of the world, and their banking sector, for example, is sanctioned. So even if they wanted to buy vaccines, they literally cannot because the banks in Iran, they're sanctioned. No one wants to deal with them. So they're cut off. So this is evil shit. But Iran has been very, they've had a lot of ingenuity, and they've been able to circumvent that, building their own weapons, reverse engineering American weapons and other things, learning not to rely so much on oil and find other ways to, develop their public health infrastructure. And this is one of those other ways right now, cooperating with China, right? So, if the U.S. is so annoyed that their influence has been reduced in the Middle East, maybe they shouldn't have fucked around like assholes. Okay, let me rephrase that, although I think it was quite clear. If the U.S. is so worried about reduced influence in Iran, they shouldn't be treating Iran like crap. They shouldn't be killing its people, starving its people, and this goes the same for all other nations. And China's smart. China's like, you know what? Let's go and trade with these countries. Let's help them out, and at the same time, it benefits everyone, right? So it's a productive thing, and I find it astonishing how the media is trying to flip it as a negative thing. Like, oh my God, how dare these countries trade with each other? Who talks like that except a colonialist piece of shit? Like, who thinks like that except a fucking imperialist? It's none of your business. Who are you? Like, are you the leader of China? Are you the leader of Iran? It's none of your fucking business if Iran and China want to trade with each other. Go and fuck yourself. You're on the other side of the planet. Eat shit. Like, what does that mean? How does that affect you? They're only mad because they want to keep Iran under a chokehold. They want to keep oppressing Iran. That's what it's about. And this, of course, at the behest of Israel. So, and you're seeing this also, again, how these people are trying to flip it. Like this woman over here, Holly Dagres, I'm not familiar with her, but she says, some Iranians inside Iran and abroad believe the country has become a client state of China after signing a 25-year strategic accord. And I love how Professor Marendi, he schooled her. He's like, some Iranians, in quotation marks, inside the U.S. and abroad believe they've failed in turning a strong and independent Iran into a client state of the U.S. The document is a roadmap, and if the UK or Germany had signed the same document with Iran or China, they would have hailed it as a major achievement. Exactly, right? It's only concerning if, the beneficiaries are not the United Kingdom and United States or the European powers. Then it's concerning. But if they can benefit from it, then, look, it's a major achievement. Look at us. We're so benevolent. We are so grand. So that was hilarious, honestly. And I absolutely agree with what Professor Marendi is saying here, that, the real story is that U.S. aggression creates realignments. That's what it's all about, man. That's what it is. And, the Belt and Road Initiative is one aspect of that. This new deal with Iran, China is one aspect of that. And it's like I said, Iran had already found good ways to kind of circumvent sanctions to begin with, but this is even better, right? And Syria also, if you look at Syria, for example, Syria's been under sanctions also for decades, just like Iran. And, Syria started becoming self-sufficient starting from the 90s onwards in terms of food at the very least, right? I told you about this, about the wheat. And yeah, you had some problems, of course, like with some policies. You had some problems with droughts as well. But in general, it's not like what you're seeing now, right? You don't have you didn't have in the 90s and early 2000s, you did not have like American troops and the SDF occupying the crops or burning the crops, stealing the oil, and people starving, 60% of Syrians food insecure. That is a result of U.S. foreign policy, of EU foreign policy, not Syria, right? Like there's a clear fucking distinction here. Like you can recognize government failure, you can recognize corruption, which every country has, and then you can also recognize reality, which is that sanctions kill people, sanctions destroy countries, and that's what this occupation and the sanctions are doing to Syria, right? So it's heartbreaking because sometimes even when you do find ways to become independent and sufficient, they still find ways to destroy you, right? That's why they're still holding on to all these supplies and crops and things in Syria, because that's their last piece of leverage. It's their last piece of leverage. And they don't care that Syrians are dying because of it. But yeah, Iran, man, you should never underestimate Iran. They've been really smart with this. Never underestimate China, Russia, Syria, Venezuela. They know these games, right? They've been going through this since before I was even born. So, the countries that don't bend to U.S. hegemony, to the UK, to the EU, they've had to learn to make do without. And this is one of those ways. And the post-U.S. era has begun, I believe. And I wish everyone prosperity and success and good things. And yeah, I just think it's funny how the mainstream media are trying to fearmonger about it. Like, it's like interesting because in the same breath, they say no details of the agreement have yet to be officially published, but it is expected to be a sweeping strategic accord that includes significant Chinese investments in Iran's key sectors such as energy and infrastructure, in addition to military cooperation. Okay, so if you don't even know the details of it, how can you be so sure that it's so concerning for the United States, right? It's like they know, but they still managed to flip it against, twist it into something negative. And, China have been doing this in other countries as well, where they come and they say like, look, we'll build your railroads in exchange for XYZ, this kind of, resource that you have, if you find some of it. And again, I told you this last time, I think I think Akon talked about this, right? Akon. So like he was explaining how, look, there's a big difference between China offering mutual respect and cooperation versus the United States coming in and bombing and colonizing and invading and then stealing your shit. And not just stealing your resources, but killing your people at the same time. Those are two completely fucking different things. And I will not tolerate anyone who tries to compare them. They are not the same thing. Okay, so anyone who talks this nonsense, I'm not interested. And they're, of course, going to keep trying to push. This is part of their whole anti-China propaganda, right? They're trying to ramp up this Cold War with China. And it's so funny how not funny, it's twisted how they keep saying that, oh, China's a threat and China's doing this and China's the source of all evil in the world. And then at the same time, when you have violence against Asians that happen, they pretend all of a sudden to care about Asians and to act as if all this propaganda in the mainstream media does not exist, like it just came out of nowhere. Now, again, it just shows their hypocrisy, right, on the international stage. But again, good on Iran, honestly, good on Iran, because they know that the United States is not going to re-enter the nuclear deal. They're not doing that, no intention, right? That's what Scott Ritter told me. I think he knows what he's talking about more than anyone else. But not only that, you can just see from the Biden administration's behavior, they have no fucking intention of re-entering that deal, because Israel has no intention of re-entering that deal. And the idea that they're somehow more diplomatic than Trump, this is nonsense. This is just posturing. They're just pretending to extend a hand. They are interested in kneecapping Iran's defenses. They're interested in making sure that Iran can't support the resistance in Palestine, in Lebanon, in Syria, in Iraq, that's what they're annoyed about. And they know that Iran is not going to sit down and tolerate that. And good on Iran. Iran has been so patient. Like, I'm not saying that, it's not hyperbole. You can literally see that Iran got their general assassinated by Trump, right? Soleimani. They did not respond. They had a U.S. drone violating their airspace. They did not respond, right? They had these new sanctions placed. They responded by, going past certain limits in the JCPOA, which is actually part of the JCPOA. It's not a breaching of the deal. Breaching of the deal is when you quit, like the United States did. That's a breach. And, they even gave another time frame for Joe Biden to re-enter the Iran nuclear deal until February 23rd. He didn't. And they gave him another fucking time frame, right? So for the next 3 months, from February 23rd, for 3 months going forward, the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, they're not allowed to look at the footage from the cameras in the facilities, and they can't just go in wherever they want because this was part of the additional protocol. However, Iran is still going to keep that material aside and give it to them as soon as sanctions are removed, okay? If they're not removed within 3 months, then they'll destroy it. So, I mean, how much more reasonable can you get, honestly? Because before, the way it was, they had 24/7 access. Like, they could just see every single day what's going on in the facilities. They could go in wherever they want. And Iran is still going to keep the surveillance going, but they're going to put it aside. It's like you rip a page out of a book and you put it in an envelope. And you say, I'll give it to you in 3 months. Or, I'll give, if you remove sanctions within the next 3 months, you can have the envelope. If you don't, I'm going to rip it up. I mean, how much more reasonable and diplomatic can you get? I really don't know how much more lenient they expect Iran to be. It's the United States that is being stubborn. They do not want to enter the deal because no fucking intention of re-entering the deal. Because they're bastards. They want to keep Iran under sanctions and pretend that they're the ones who pretend that Iran is stubborn. No, that's not how it works. So good on Iran. Good for them doing this. And, for standing up to U.S. unilateralism and hegemony. Good on them.